Your private swimming is disrupting our community's aesthetic standards. That's a $1,000 fine. That's what HOA President Margaret Sullivan screamed at me while I was floating peacefully in my own backyard lake. Yes, my lake. The one that's been on my family's property deed since 1952. But Margaret didn't know that my quiet little lake wasn't just a swimming hole. It was the primary water source for the entire Sunset Ridge development. And after 70 years of free access, I was about to start charging rent. What happened next would cost each of the 340 homeowners $5,000 per year in new water access fees, and turn Margaret's perfect suburban paradise into the most expensive neighborhood mistake in county history. Comment below if you've ever dealt with HOA overreach. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Jake Morrison, and I inherited my family's lake house from my grandmother 2 years ago. The property has been in our family since my grandfather bought 47 acres of undeveloped land in 1952 for $3,800. Back then this was all farmland and forest. The centerpiece of our property was a natural spring-fed lake, 12 acres of crystal-clear water that never froze completely in winter and stayed cool even in summer heat. My grandfather built a modest cabin on the shore, and our family spent every summer swimming, fishing, and enjoying the peace and quiet. It was our private paradise, miles from the nearest neighbor. That started changing in 2018 when developers bought all the surrounding farmland and built Sunset Ridge, a luxury housing development with 340 homes priced between $800,000 and $2.2 million. The marketing materials were beautiful, lakefront living at its finest, and exclusive water access in a gated community. What the marketing didn't mention was that all those lakefront lots and water access rights were based on my family's lake. The developers had somehow convinced buyers they were purchasing waterfront property, but they never actually owned any water. When the first families moved into Sunset Ridge, I tried to be welcoming. I'd grown up understanding that lakes are meant to be shared, and my grandmother had always let local kids swim and fish as long as they were respectful. The new homeowners seemed nice enough at first. They'd wave when they saw me on the lake, and a few even introduced themselves when they walked their dogs along the shore. But everything changed when the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association was officially established and Margaret Sullivan was elected president. Margaret was exactly what you'd expect from an HOA power tripper. Mid-50s, blonde highlights that cost more than most people's rent, and the kind of entitlement that comes from never being told no in her entire life. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening in June, wearing a business suit and carrying a leather portfolio like she was conducting a corporate merger. "Mr. Morrison," she said without any pleasantries, "we need to discuss your swimming situation." My, what now? The HOA board has been reviewing community standards, and we've determined that your recreational use of the lake is inconsistent with our neighborhood's aesthetic values. I stared at her, trying to process what I'd just heard. Margaret, this is my lake. On my property. That I inherited from my family. Be that as it may, your activities are visible from our homeowners' backyards. Sunset Ridge residents paid premium prices for serene water views, not to watch someone splashing around like a public swimming pool. Are you seriously telling me I can't swim in my own lake? I'm telling you that community standards require all waterfront activities to be approved by the HOA board. We're prepared to allow fishing and kayaking during designated hours, but swimming is too disruptive. And if I refuse? Margaret's smile was ice cold. Then you'll discover that good neighbors find ways to cooperate. I thought Margaret was bluffing until the first fine arrived in my mailbox a week later. Notice of violation, unauthorized swimming activities, $200 fine. The citation claimed I was violating community water use standards and creating visual pollution in shared waterfront areas. I called Margaret immediately. Margaret, you can't fine me for using my own property. Actually, Jake, we can. The county has adopted our community standards as part of the local ordinances. Swimming without HOA approval is now a finable offense. I hung up and called the county office. After 3 transfers and 2 hours on hold, I finally reached someone who could explain what was happening. Mr. Morrison, when the Sunset Ridge development was approved, the HOA submitted community standards that referenced shared waterfront management for the area. Since your property borders the development, those standards technically apply to any activities visible from HOA properties. But it's my lake. Sir, I understand your frustration, but the legal language is complicated. You might want to consult with a property attorney. Over the next month the fines kept coming. $200 for unauthorized morning swim, $300 for extended recreational water use, $250 for failure to post swimming schedule with HOA, $500 for swimming during designated quiet hours. Each fine came with increasingly ridiculous justifications. Apparently, my swimming was disturbing the natural wildlife habitat and creating unsafe wake conditions for other lake users. What other lake users? I was the only person who actually owned any part of the lake. The final straw came on a Saturday in July. I was floating on my back enjoying the sunshine when I heard a megaphone from the shore. "Attention lake trespasser. You are in violation of community standards." I looked toward my dock to see Margaret standing there with two HOA board members and what appeared to be a private security guard. "Exit the water immediately or face escalated enforcement action." That's when I lost it. I swam to shore, climbed out of MY Lake on MY Dock and walked over to Margaret. "Are you out of your mind? This is private property. Your swimming activities are in direct violation of HOA regulations. That's a $1,000 fine for continued non-compliance." She handed me a citation that was longer than most legal contracts. "Margaret, I've had enough. You want to play games with fines? Let's play games." That weekend, I drove to the county courthouse and spent 2 days researching every document related to my property and the Sunset Ridge development. What I found was absolutely stunning. When the developers built Sunset Ridge, they needed access to the lake for their marketing promises of waterfront living. So they negotiated an informal agreement with the previous property owner, my elderly grandmother. The agreement was simple. Sunset Ridge residents could have recreational access to the lake in exchange for maintaining the access roads and keeping the shoreline clean. But here's what Margaret and her HOA didn't know. The agreement was only valid as long as my grandmother owned the property. When she passed away and I inherited the land, the agreement expired. For the past 2 years, 340 homeowners had been using my lake without any legal right to do so. Even better, I found the original water rights documentation from 1952. My grandfather hadn't just bought land, he'd purchased exclusive water rights to the entire lake and the underground springs that fed it. According to the legal documents, anyone who wanted to use the lake needed written permission from the property owner. And that property owner was me. I took all the documents to Sarah Chin, a property rights attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. "Jake," she said after reviewing everything, "this is remarkable. You don't just own the lake, you own all the water rights. The entire Sunset Ridge development is essentially trespassing." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you can charge them rent. Market rate for water access rights in this area is approximately $5,000 per property per year." I nearly fell out of my chair. "You're saying I can charge 340 homeowners $5,000 each?" "Not only can you charge them, but you can also demand back payment for the 2 years they've been using your lake without permission. That's $3.4 million in total fees. And if they refuse to pay? Then you can legally prohibit all access to the lake. No swimming, no boating, no fishing, no walking along the shoreline. You can even put up fences to block the view from their properties." Armed with legal documentation, I had Sarah draft a formal notice to the Sunset Ridge HOA. Notice of Water Rights Enforcement. To Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association from Jake Morrison, legal owner of Morrison Lake and Associated Water Rights Re. Unauthorized use of private water resources. Effective immediately, all Sunset Ridge residents are using Morrison Lake without legal authorization. Per county water rights documentation dating to 1952, access to lake water and shoreline requires written permission from the property owner. To obtain legal access, each property must pay annual water access rights fees of $5,000 per household. Back payment for unauthorized use 2022 to 2024 totals $10,000 per household. Properties that do not comply within 30 days will be prohibited from any lake access, including visual access that enhances property values. Payment schedule attached. I hand-delivered copies to Margaret and posted notices at every lake access point the HOA had been using. Margaret called me within 2 hours of receiving the notice. Her voice was shaking with rage. "Jake, this is extortion. You can't charge us for water rights." "Actually, Margaret, I can. Just like you can fine me for swimming in my own lake." Those fines were legitimate HOA enforcement. And these fees are legitimate property rights enforcement. Would you like to discuss a payment plan? We'll fight this in court. Feel free. My attorney says we have an airtight case. Oh, and Margaret? Until this is resolved, all HOA members are banned from the lake. That includes walking on the shoreline or using it for any recreational activities. You can't do that. Our property values depend on lake access. Then I guess you better start writing checks. 3 days later, Margaret called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, but my neighbor Tom, who lived just outside the development, attended as my unofficial spy. According to Tom, it was absolute chaos. Margaret started by trying to rally homeowners against me. This is extortion. This man is trying to steal $5,000 from every family. But the homeowners had done their research too. Several had consulted their own attorneys and discovered the same thing. My water rights were legitimate. Margaret, one homeowner said, why didn't you know about this when you were writing all those fines? How could we not know we didn't actually have lake access? Asked another. Did the developers lie to us about waterfront rights? The meeting devolved into shouting matches between homeowners who wanted to pay the fees to preserve their property values and those who wanted to fight in court. But the biggest bombshell came when someone asked about the HOA's legal budget. We have $47,000 in our legal fund, Margaret admitted. But fighting this in court could cost $200,000 or more. So our choice is pay Jake $5,000 each or pay lawyers $200,000 and probably still lose? Margaret had no good answer. While the HOA debated their options, word spread through the real estate community about the water rights dispute. Property values in Sunset Ridge immediately started dropping. Who wants to buy a waterfront property that doesn't actually include water access? Within 2 weeks, 3 houses were pulled off the market. 2 sales fell through when buyers learned about the dispute. Property appraisals dropped by an average of $150,000. The homeowners were panicking. They'd paid premium prices for lakefront living, and now they might lose both the lake access and their property values. Margaret tried to rally support for a legal fight, but the math was brutal. Legal fees, $200,000 plus with no guarantee of winning. Lost property values, $51 million across all homes. Alternative, pay $1.7 million in annual fees and preserve $400+ million in property values. While the HOA fought among themselves, I hired a private investigator to research the original Sunset Ridge development. What we found was stunning. The developers had never actually secured water rights for the lake access they'd promised buyers. They'd relied on the informal agreement with my grandmother, knowing she was elderly and unlikely to enforce property rights. They'd essentially sold $400 million worth of houses based on lake access they didn't own. Better yet, the sales contracts for every Sunset Ridge home specifically mentioned exclusive lake access as a key feature. The developers had committed fraud by selling something they couldn't deliver. My attorney immediately filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission and began preparing lawsuits against the development company. 6 weeks after my initial notice, Margaret finally called to discuss terms. Jake, the HOA board is prepared to make you an offer. I'm listening. We'll pay $2,500 per household per year for lake access rights. That's $850,000 annually. My original offer was $5,000 per household. That's $1.7 million annually. Jake, be reasonable. These are families, not corporations. Margaret, these are families who've been fining me for swimming in my own lake. Families who paid premium prices for waterfront living and are now discovering what property rights actually mean. What if we drop all the existing fines against you? I laughed. Margaret, you owe me $1,450 in bogus fines. I'm offering you access to a $12 million lake. The math doesn't work in your favor. After 3 more weeks of negotiations, Margaret came back with a final proposal. $4,000 per household annually, $1.36 million total. 5-year guaranteed contract with automatic renewal. HOA maintained shoreline and access roads. All previous fines against me dropped and refunded. Written apology from the HOA board. And if I refuse? I asked. Then we'll pay the legal fees and fight you in court. Margaret, you'll spend $200,000 fighting a case you'll lose, and your homeowners will lose millions in property values. Take the deal. She was quiet for a long time. The board needs to vote. The final HOA vote was 276 in favor, 64 opposed. The opposition came mainly from homeowners who were planning to sell anyway and didn't want to pay fees for lake access they wouldn't use. But the majority recognized reality. Paying $4,000 per year was far cheaper than losing $150,000 in property value. The contract was signed on October 15th, with the first payments due November 1st. Margaret handed me the check for the first year's payment, $1,360,000. Jake, she said quietly, I want you to know this isn't personal. Margaret, you fine me $1,000 for swimming in my own lake. It became personal the moment you started treating my family's property like your personal kingdom. 6 months later, Sunset Ridge had stabilized under new HOA leadership. Margaret had resigned in disgrace after homeowners learned about her role in the fine campaign. The new HOA president, David Kim, approached lake access completely differently. "Jake, we want to be good neighbors," he said during our first meeting. "What can we do to make this relationship work for everyone?" I appreciated his attitude, so I offered a few compromises. Reduced fees for seniors and young families, community swimming classes for kids, annual lake cleanup events, shared maintenance of walking trails. The property values recovered within 8 months, and several new families specifically bought into Sunset Ridge because of the exclusive negotiated lake access. The lawsuit against the original developers was even more successful. They'd sold homes with promises of lake access they couldn't deliver, which qualified as consumer fraud. The settlement was $2.3 million, split between the HOA for legal fees and damages, and me for unauthorized use of my property. 3 executives from the development company were charged with real estate fraud and received fines and probation. Today, my lake generates $1.36 million annually in access fees, making it one of the most profitable 12-acre properties in the county. But more importantly, I've established a relationship with my neighbors based on mutual respect rather than HOA intimidation. The lake access arrangement has actually enhanced everyone's property values. Real estate agents now market Sunset Ridge as featuring exclusive negotiated access to private spring-fed lake. Margaret moved away 6 months ago. I heard she's living in a condo complex with no HOA and no water views. And yes, I still swim in my lake every morning. No fines, no complaints, no HOA interference. The difference is that now I'm swimming in the most expensive private lake in the county, generating more revenue per acre than most commercial properties. Sometimes the best revenge against HOA overreach is teaching them the difference between community standards and property rights. Sometimes a $1,000 fine leads to $1.36 million in annual income. And sometimes when someone tries to fine you for swimming in your own lake, the best response is to charge them rent for looking at it. What would you have done in my situation? Comment below with your thoughts on HOA overreach. And subscribe for more property rights victories.